Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. We're excited to have John Grant and Jenny Hollingsworth from Innovia Consulting with us. And John and Jenny will be presenting on Be a Master at Capacity and Routings. It's our Business Central for Manufacturing 101 webinar series. And before I pass it over to John and Jenny to cover on this hot topic, I would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review and share with anyone. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box. We will get them answered during our Q&A time at the end of our session. So now I'll pass it on over to Jenny to kick off our presentation.
All right, thanks, Angie. All right, so like Angie said, we're going to talk about being a master at capacity and routings. John and I have been teaching the Manufacturing 1 and 2 courses through the NAV BC user group community, as well as hosting classes each year at NAVIC Summit Conference for pre-academy training. So we thought we'd break apart our classes and take our knowledge of manufacturing and create a webinar series as an alternate way for users to get more informed about manufacturing and get their questions answered. So just to introduce ourselves, again, I'm Jenny Hollingsworth. I'm a senior application consultant here at Innovia. Been at Innovia, little background, about 15 years coming up. And I worked for another partner for about 10 years. So I've been working with NAV and now Business Central for about 25-ish years. So I'll let John introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Grant. I'm also at Innovia. I've been here a while, 10 plus years, I think. Have had a chance to work on other ERP products like AX and Sightline, and Made to Manage, and some other ones I've soon forgotten, but big lean proponent, and hopefully to share some, not only how the functionality, how NAV runs, but how to use it, how other customers have used some of the functionality to help their business problems.
All right. So looking at the agenda for our webinar today, we're going to cover basically everything you need to know to get routings set up and working. So we'll look at the different setup tables in the capacity area of manufacturing. We'll look at capacity resources, so work centers and machine centers, and then also routings. We're going to talk about basic fields, extras that you can use that might be helpful, some of the functions available, and if there's any reports available for routings. So we'll look at those three areas. So first, let's go through capacity setups. All right. So the first table is the capacity units of measure table. So this is where you would go to define your units of measure for your work centers or machine centers. So that would be normally minutes, hours, and days. And as we go through how to set up work centers, machine centers, and routings, John will have some tips on what he thinks you should use for units of measure on those areas. The next setup table would be work shifts. So work shifts are used by the shop floor calendars to identify what your work shift hours are. And it's important to remember that your availability and efficiency of your work and machine centers can be evaluated according to these work shifts. So in this example, you can see our business has two shifts. We have the first shift running from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and the second shift running from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. So that would bring us to shop calendars. So here you can define shop calendars for your standard work week. So in our example here, you'll see we have a base calendar. Monday through Friday, we have 2 shifts. And on that calendar, on the right-hand side, you can see our working days. So you can see Monday, we work 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and we have that tied to our work shift code 1. And then we have a second line for Monday, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. tied to that work shift code 2. So then we just added 2 lines for every day of the week that we're working and associated those with the work shift codes. And then of course, right under the working days, you can also set up your holidays. So you want to make sure you have those set up so that capacity isn't created for any of those days when you are not working. So with the shop floor calendar, you'll have your working days, your holidays, and that's going to determine your gross available capacity for your work and machine centers. So those are the setup tables for capacity. So why don't we look at what capacity resources are? So in NAV and Business Central, they're the same. There's 3 types of capacity resources. We have work center groups, work centers, and machine centers. So just a quick snippet on each. Work center groups, that's a reporting unit. So you can report and see the capacity of your entire facility, including all of your work centers and machine centers. The work centers would be the center where the work is performed. And then the machine centers, this could be a machine, a group of machines with identical characteristics. It could be a person or a group of people who perform similar operations. And one thing to note about machine centers, if you're just starting out with manufacturing, they're not required. You can just use work center groups and work centers. But you can go to the machine center level, and that would be the lowest level in the whole capacity resource hierarchy. So the first one, work center groups, again, it's used to show the total hours of capacity for that group. In our example here, we only have 1 work center group for our facility, so our whole production floor. We want to view total hours of capacity for the entire facility. And then we have a separate work center group for our subcontracting vendors. So as you'll learn in another webinar where we discuss subcontracting, work centers are set up for our subcontracting vendors. So we like to keep those separate. John, anything you want to add on work center groups?
I've seen the work center group companies use it to take that macro look at our schedule, schedule next week, 2 weeks out. Like these 15 work centers are assigned to that. You might have 4 lines. They're all assigned to the same work center group, and you could use that to look at your rough cut load and possibly move people around, or maybe there's enough work that you might need temps to come in. It's kind of a look at total hours for a week, 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, to try and do some planning on where do I need people. It's one way to utilize that versus one work center at a time. For instance, to look at line 1 might be a work center possibly, and you want to see all my lines, so I have to move people around. That's used for something like that.
Okay. So then we'll look at, we'll have a few slides here on work centers and how they're set up. So I'm going to let John give us his knowledge on how to set up work centers.
Yeah, in work centers, again, are the level above a machine, and many companies, that's all they really need. So in here, we assign the work center group, which we just talked about. There is an alternate work center available here, but it's just informational. It doesn't shift work around or do any of that kind of thing. And the block means we don't want to use this work center. It's no longer used, and we don't want to use it on a new routing, for instance, if we pick the blocked work center. And a blocked work center could be as simple as a CNC machine. That could be a work center. And if you've got a newer CNC machine, you might block the old one, and for instance, that kind of thing. Okay. So that's kind of the initial header part of the work center. Then you get into the a little more detail on work centers allow you to put costs on labor, costing on your routing, a lot of different options. So this is one where an example of, well, on average, and that's all the direct per unit cost, is just an average of direct costs in this department, in this work center is $15. We didn't have any indirect, and it's you know, you can mark that $15 up by a percentage. Overhead rate could go here. That could be the overhead on an employee, it could be overhead on a machine, and it all rolls up into the unit cost. And typically we set the work centers up in hours, and that's on another tab we'll see. So I'm saying that this work center, for every hour we charge to a job, is $15 an hour. That's the total. You can manually enter unit costs, but you let the system calculate the unit cost. You know, just roll it all up. Some people will manually do that. The unit of measure, there's two. If you notice unit cost calculation, there's two unit choices there. It can be unit or time. This is an example of time, again, $15 an hour. The other would be for every output produced, we charge 50 cents, for instance. So that can be a flat rate per output versus anything to do with hours. Specific cost is used when we're trying to, for subcontractors mostly, although we have used it in other situations, again, to add that additional cost per unit that we, an example might be a subcontractor assembles items for you and they charge 50 cents an item. You can either put it on this work center, but if they do several different types of items for you, you might put it on the routing then for that. The routing for item A is 50 cents per unit, item B is 35 cents per unit. So you have those kind of options to add those additional costs. You got your two dimensions, global 1 and global 2. Subcontractor, if this truly was a work center for a subcontractor, you put the vendor number in there, and you might even call this work center the vendor number. Flushing method can be used to automatically consume the labor based on the output on that operation. Meaning, we have customers who build their routings to reflect how they roll up their costs. That's a strategy. Probably one of the first questions when you start looking at your routings is, how does it address your cost roll up? It can be very straightforward. It could be one operation if you're just starting and we have so much an hour. But the more advanced you go, you do have capabilities to have, I guess the one we have an example or we worked with was, they have their routing reflects, they have the machine overhead, they have a setup person's time and the assembly people all in their routing to help the roll up to get a more exact cost on how they're doing things. And then you have the option of automatically backflushing the labor. That's a good option if you're on a lean journey. You know, capturing actuals is always considered a waste in lean. Those of you that aren't, it sounds kind of strange, but if you follow the lean process, it really is. And that's one of the things that you can do is when I complete one of these, I can automatically absorb that labor rather than a journal entry later on. Because you know, many customers start with material only on their production, and then labor is added as a journal entry. But you do have ability to set that up and use it here. And then the general product posting group is used to post that labor. What accounts do we hit for that?
And just a plug for future sessions in our manufacturing series. We will have a session that talks about subcontracting and how that works. We will have a session on the flushing method and how auto consumption of labor and materials work. And then we'll also have a session on how manufacturing costing works, which will include the setups in that product posting group.
Yeah, so it all fits together. Okay, now we're on to the scheduling setups, and if we have a choice, the unit of measure is always hours. The reason being that I, as a planner, when I want to look at how many hours do we have loaded up, I'd prefer to see, oh, we've got 7.5 hours loaded up out of our 8 available versus 480 minutes, and we've got 432 minutes loaded up. I think it's just an easier visibility to look at a load on a particular work center of how many hours you have loaded up. And so I'd encourage you to look at that. And also that goes along with this, there's a rounding precision. Is that showing? There it is, yeah. Mm-hmm. This one here, this field doesn't show normally, but I encourage you to consider it, because now when I look at hours, I'm going to see the load is 7.25 hours, not 7.25123, 5 decimals. I, as a planner or a scheduler, am looking at just a quick look at how many hours we have booked. And this setup here supports the hours and then 2 decimal precision on that.
And that field, just a side note, like John said, it is not normally on the work center card. It's not even a field to choose, but it is in the table. So you would need your developer or a developer to add that to the page for you.
But again, it gives you good, quick looks versus the 5 decimals, which gets a little much in when you're trying to just look at rough cut loads. Capacity is basically used to, if I think of this as how many mixers do I have available in this work center? In this example, we have 3. So if we're open 8 hours a day, I have 24 hours of mixer capacity. Pretty straightforward. And when I load hours out to this work center, it will load them, and you'll see that I have 20 hours out of 24 loaded. And then this capacity, later on, we'll see how we can use that to say for a job, no, I don't want to use 1 of the mixers in this work center. I want to use 2 and get it done twice as fast. You can do those kind of things. Efficiency, I encourage you to start off at 100%, but this really backs out of the, I'll do an easy one. Let's say we have a 10-hour shift. If we were 90% efficient, it would schedule 9 of those 10 hours when it schedules. So if I had a job that took 9 hours, it would be on 2 different days, 8 hours on one day and 1 hour on the next, because I only have 9 hours available. Consolidated calendars comes into play when you are using machines. So you can tell the system my capacity is based on looking at the machines, how many hours they're open, and that pushes up to, so when I look at the work center, I might only have 20 hours available because I've got 2 machines that are running 8 hours and 1 running 6 hours, not the full shift or half a shift. So I consolidate calendars is used when you have machine center set up and you've got capacity at each machine, just to give you a view of that work center, because you would get both a load on the machine by itself plus an overall load on this work center when you look at that. We talked about the calendar queue time, we didn't talk about, but that's the wait time, if there is such a thing. The average wait time before this work center could be used. I don't see that being used a lot, but it's available. So if you said, well, my queue time is always, I don't know, maybe an example might be a paint booth. In between jobs, I have a 2-hour changeover or a 1-hour changeover. I could put a queue time of 1 hour, and that would build it into the routing. Again, I forgot to mention, any questions are fair game. If anybody has any questions, to just jump in at any time. We're good with that. I'll say, so continue with the work center. The remainder of the fields are, we have warehouse. If you're using warehousing, the example is you have material that you deliver to this work center before the work can get started. If you're using warehousing with bins, you need to tell it where to deliver the products or the raw material in order to have this work center start its job. And this is where you would set that up versus you could do it to that level. So I could say location is I don't know, New York, and my open shop floor bin means that is components that are stored in that area. It might be a virtual bin. To production bin is where I'm moving the material on a pick from bin, the storage of the raw material to the production bin for this work center, because we're going to do some work here. And then from production bin typically is just on the last operation if needed. A lot of times it's not needed, but it's where it ends up, and at that point it would be moved from this bin to the next operation or moved on. So if you're using warehousing, this is an option to help with where do I move the material that we're picking when we have bins set up. So this overrides, there's also on the location record and just on the company record some these same three fields that would be more like a production, you're moving it from raw material to production, but you're not specifically saying where you're moving it. It might just be a virtual bin on the floor.
And I'll add in another plug here. We will have a future webinar session in our series that will go over how you can incorporate warehouse management with production. So moving on from work centers, now we'll look at some of the setups on the machine center, which again is the lowest level in the hierarchy. So again, I'll let John give us a few tidbits on the machine center.
Okay, so the machine center, again, you don't have to use, but if you do, this again, remember we had the mixer was our work center, and we said there's three mixers in our work center for capacities. Now we're looking at, we actually want to schedule down to that level, not just to the mixer. We want to go mixer work center, we go down to the individual machine. And in that case, I would set up a machine, and this is mixer 101. Just give it a number. If you notice the work center, we assign it to our mixer work center, which was 100, and then it's got the block capability too. So pretty basic, but yet this is going to allow me to schedule or assign work right to the machine versus a work center, where the work center might be, you might give that production order to the lead in that mixer area, and they determine where to run it. But if your process is, no, I want to actually schedule, say mixer 101 is a larger capacity, and mixer 102 is medium, and certain runs you would want to always run the 101 because that's the most efficient. Might be an example of that.
All right.
And then similarly, we have the posting setups like we saw in the work center. Now these are inherited. Those posting groups and all that are right here again, but you could have a different direct cost, indirect cost, overhead rate to come up with a unit cost per machine. So it doesn't have to be at the work center level. You can assign it to the machine. Again, flushing method comes into play. So you can, this is used if we are going to forward or backward flush labor. Again, if your routing is solid, and in the lean principle, if I'm doing this operation day after day after day, do I really need to log in and out on it, or can I just back flush the labor because that operation, we're solid on that. We don't need to have somebody clock in and out on it or to that level. It depends on your company and your processes again, but it does support auto consuming labor, meaning that that labor number at month end is no longer a general ledger entry. It's being pushed into cost of goods sold as production is being output during the month. And that to me makes a lot of sense to do that. And then of course you have your posting group, which says where do I do the labor in that. And then again, another area here is machine center is the scheduling setups. So again, now we've got capacity at the machine center level. Again, it could represent how many of these machine types you have. So the work center could be, let's just call it machining. And then the machine center is a CNC machine, and I have 3 of those. So I could say I have capacity 3 of those. Again, so I could schedule down, but in this case, it's a 1-for-1. We have 1 mixer, 101. Our capacities is 1. Efficiency comes into play again. Out of an 8-hour day, how many do I want to schedule on this mixer? Then we also have the queue time, which in my experience isn't used a lot, but it's available again if there's a wait time in between.
We got the scheduling.
And then there's a routing setup on the machine center, which we didn't see on the work center. And these are defaults. So if I always have, let's say every time I schedule a job on mixer 101, I have a half-hour setup. I could put that as the default on the machine center. So when I add this machine to my routing, it populates these fields automatically from the setups. So you can do some of these fields if they apply. Again, in my experience, not a lot of customers use this defaulting method, but it's available. And then the last one, similar to the work centers, is the warehouse setup. So the same functionality. Now I'm delivering product not to a work center, but to an actual machine. So when I create if I have pick backward as my method and I'm with bins, it will want to move from raw material aisle bin row to most of the time it's like a virtual bin by this machine, because I need the product there before I can start my work. So this is the way to load that up. If your process is moving material from the racks right to a machine. So it functions the same way as if it was a work center, but now you're at the machine center level. Before we go to the next slide, so that was a quick overview of work centers, and a subset of a work center is machine center. You see some of the fields are the same, but it allows you to, I guess how are these used? Let me give you a quick example. This mixer. We have a routing, let's say we got 3 mixers, they're all the same capacity. So in my routing, I don't call out mixer machine 101 because I don't know if that's the one I'm going to use. But I call out the work center mixer on my routing. So when the production order is created, it's probably created as a firm planned order. Now I, as the planner, when I'm going to go to release it, I assign it to mixer 101 because that's where I'm going to run it on Thursday. So that's the thought process of your routing might be at the work center level, but if your process supports the planner assigning it to an individual machine, and there's a few ways to do that in another session, we'll go through how you do that, but that's the thought process, is your routing used for the cost roll-ups, and you can roll up standard or FIFO, either one, but that work center is fine for the cost roll-up, but you're not telling it which mixer to run on until I, as the planner, am releasing it to the floor. So that's kind of how that fits together. And if you had the 3 different mixers and they were different sizes, and you knew this product always runs on mixer 101. In your routing, you would put mixer 101, that machine center, right away, because that's where I want it to run. And then one more example of that is if I had two presses, let's say 100-ton and a 50-ton press, I need this to run on the 50-ton press, so I would put that in the machine in the routing. But as a planner, that press might be booked up, so I could also run it on the 100, not that I really want to, but I have to hit the due date. And then you would start getting variances in your analysis on the job. Oh, we planned it on the 50-ton, but the planner ran it on the 100 because we were booked up. Now you start analyzing and seeing maybe we need another 50-ton press because we keep using a 100-ton, which costs us a little more than the 50. So those are some of the things that come into play as you start building your routings and determining the defaults.
All right, so once your work centers and your machine centers are set up, the next thing you have to remember to do to calculate your capacities is calculate your calendars. So I just put a screenshot in here showing a work center list, and you can see that we calculated the calendars out for each day. And this is interesting. If you look at, for example, 110 refine, you'll see there's 16 hours in a day. And that's because we have two 8-hour work shifts. But if you look at the mixer, because we have capacity of 3, that's 16 times 3. So we have 48 hours available in a day for that mixer. Work center. This is the work center list. So we gave, if you're going to do work centers, you're going to go to the work center list, click the process button, calculate calendars. Machine center, it's a little more convoluted to get to. You have to go to process, go to the calendars option, show matrix, click more options, actions, functions, calculate. So it's a little deeper to find, but I wanted to put this slide in here just to give you a view of where you can calculate calendars. And then once we move over to Nav Business Central later in the demonstration, we can show that within the software itself as well. And I keep saying Nav, but one thing to note is if you're a Nav user or you're on Business Central, what we're talking about today are the exact same no matter which version you're in. All right, so now we're going to look at the routings. And first, we're going to go through the basics. What are the basic fields that you would need to set up on a routing to sequence your operations for manufacturing a product? After we look at just the basics, then we're going to go through some of the extra fields that are on the routings that might help you out in your routing setup. So John, you want to go ahead and share some of the basics about the routing?
Okay, so again, we're much like the bill of material, but there's a header. So the number you assign is often your finished item number or your subassembly number, but it doesn't have to be. If you have a routing that is shared among several products, an example might be you're making 10 different products and the only difference is color, you might be able to share the same routing on all 10 of those items. Depends on your business, but normally I see a 1-to-1, and while this number is a part number in BC, it's not looking in the item table to verify this. It's just user defined. Description often is the item description also. Two different types of routings we can set up. There's serial, meaning operations are performed consecutively. So if we have a 3 or 4 step routing, 5-step, 10 is done before 20, before 30, before 40. And then there's a second type, which is parallel, meaning when this operation step, the next 2 are run at the same time. And oftentimes we use that when we're working with customers to present a more, I'll call it exact costing roll-up. We'll use parallel routings. We'll have one for the machine, one for the, like I mentioned, the setup man, and one for the number of people running it. Those would be set up in a parallel. We also have a status field, which is obviously new. Create a new one. Certified means that it can be used on a production order. If it's not certified, you can't use it. Under development, you would, if I could do maintenance to this routing, I would put under development my changes and then recertify it. And then closed is we're not using it any longer. So if someone tries to use it, you couldn't create a production order and use a closed routing. So pretty basic there. Okay, so now if we look at the lines, we'll go through this. I'll say types. You have work centers or machines. Remember, we can schedule to a work center or a machine. Standard task code is available. That would be a description of what they're doing. An example would be, I have 2 steps in a row on the same machine. Work center one, well, let's do this one. Let's see, work center 100, but I'm gonna let them know what they're doing. So I have visibility, I've scheduled 2 steps. In total, I need 2 hours in the work center, but I've now identified, okay, this one is, I don't know, setup and startup of machine, and the second one, the task code might be, run the product. So you do have some flexibility to, and the key here is to schedule your time all in the same work center or machine, yet give them specifically what is it that they're doing, because I need those hours all pulled together when I look at the load on a work center or machine. In addition to this, we have setup time and runtime. Setup time is simply, it's done once on a production order. So if I say my setup time is a half hour, I run the production order, I'm only going to have a half hour setup time charged. And then runtime would be how long does it take per the unit of measure of the item. And we'll talk about this. There's a field called the lot size, which comes into play. But think of runtime as, if I'm making one of these, I need 2.5 hours of runtime to make it. We'll keep it simple. And then there's 3 additional fields to plan buffers in your schedule. Wait time. If I'm example might be something is I don't know, it's heated and it has to cool. Might be extreme would be a paint booth. I paint it and then I've got to let it dry for 3 hours or something. You can do that with wait time, so that you don't have the next operation starting right away, because I've got to wait for it. Move time is time to transfer or transmit it from one operation to the next. Move time is typically not, well, it's not using a calendar that, like we saw 8 hours a day. It's using the runtime or the calendar 24-hour period, not just the calendar that we built. And then queue time, waiting for setup and processing at the machine, which I mentioned. You could put that in the work center machine or enter it here. And typically, I like to see hours, because again, and there's a method to do this. Like a lot of times you'll see in 1 hour, and then you say how many parts can you do in an hour. Pretty simple way to do it. Plus, when I'm reviewing the routing, I can translate that a lot faster than, oh, this one part takes 0.12345 of a minute. Trying to figure out, well, how many can we do in an hour? Because this, how many in an hour or 2 hours or a shift is available to print on shop paper to give the employee or the person running the job expectations on what kind of pace of work they should be doing. The other field on here is a fixed scrap quantity. This is something that at the start of the operation, you've got some, let's say 2 parts to get the machine in sync. You can build that into your demand. And if you have material attached, it will also, to the route step, it'll calculate that and what you need.
Hey, John.
Yep.
John, We're not there
Yeah.
yet. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
We have some slides coming up that'll show that too.
Oh, okay. So I'll hold off on that.
That's okay. So like John said, he went through the basics of the routing, the different, setup, runtime, move time, wait time. Those are all that's really required in a routing, but then there's extra fields that could certainly help out. And so the first one I'm going to have John talk about is the standard test code.
Okay, so in this example, we've got the same work center with what are they actually doing. And all I'm really getting at is you're scheduling all the time to work center 100, but you're yet still providing what's happening with 2 different route steps. Same work center on each operation line with separate tasks. So you can do that. Because if you just pull in the work center, it's just going to pull in the name, and you can manually type that in. If you use task codes, you can pull in, you can set up task codes and pull those in to help with that also. Okay, another key field here that doesn't get, I don't know why the BC doesn't expose this right away, but I'm a big fan of this routing link code. Oh, this one doesn't expose it right away, but this allows me to attach bill of material components to an operation step in my routing. So in this example, we've got 6, 7, 8 items, all attached to routing link code 99, and on the right side, the routing link code 99 is set up as the last operation. Meaning when I post output, if my items are set up as backward flushing, the raw materials on the left side, when I post output of 10, I would go back and consume automatically the components for 10. And that works pretty well. The only time you might have an issue is you have to be aware of if you have long running production orders. If you attach material to the last operation, it's going to say the need date is the date that last operation starts for planning. And that might not support your raw materials. It might be too late. So that's just something to be aware of in the process. Okay. Then we've got fixed scrap quantity. And it's used in the for back flushing material as well as rolling up the product for your costs. And this example, we don't have any filled in here, but if I created this production order and I had a fixed scrap quantity on an operation and I have material attached to that operation, it will plan additional material because I'm saying that, and let's say we have a scrap factor of 10% at this operation. So if I was running 100, I need 110 quantity of the raw materials, and it would plan for that. So this is scrap on an operation versus on the raw material itself. But it does apply to the time as well as the material if there's any material attached to the operation. And then there's also the scrap factor percentage that at the end of the operation, you might be scrapping something. And again, it's used in the roll-ups and posting of raw material. I don't see a lot of customers using the scrap factor on operations. They use it more on the material, but it is available if you have an operation where you know, because you need to plan a little more time and more material if you're using the routing link code on that operation to make things happen and plan correctly. Okay, another field that can be used is concurrent capacities. And a best example of that is in this routing, we're scheduling to, let's say, work center, we'll just pick like 130, okay? So we're saying we're going to use one of those coding machines. Now let's say that we have 3 of those available, or 2, let's say we have 2. We have a job that runs 16 hours. If I say my concurrent capacities is 1, it's going to take 16 hours to run, so 2 shifts potentially. If I say 2 of those concurrent capacities, we'll get it done in 1 day because we're using 2 of those work centers or machines. The thing to remember is we will have 2 setups. If your routing has setup, it'll do 2 setups, but we would get it done to meet a deadline. I had one customer, they had 5 CNC machines, and every once in a while, because they had a rush order, they would schedule instead of 1, they would schedule all 5. So an extreme 40-hour job could get done in 1 day if they schedule all 5. And that's concurrent capacities, a use for that. Another field here is the send ahead quantity, and think of that as, example is I'm filling a pallet worth of product, and it's a large run, large order. As I move a pallet, I can start the next operation. And this is used with parallel operations, but that's the use for it. So I don't wait till all like 500 items are done at operation 10. I can start operation 20 when I have 100 done. Again, you're condensing the expected capacity usage because you're sending it ahead when I have a pallet full, when I have a container full of something. So it's available, don't have to use it, but it's available. Unit cost per can be used if the cost is different than the work center or machine center. And pretty much I see this, go ahead, Jane.
I was just going to say, a lot of times it's used more for subcontracting,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So what this is one subcontractor provides 5 different heat treating services for us. But each, depending on the component, is a different price. So I can't set it up on the work center and say it's 50 cents each. The routing would be a good place to do that because I assign the routing to the finished item, and on this one I could say that subcontractor heat treating is 75 cents a piece, and this one is 25 cents. So that's a use for that unit cost. And then the lot size, which is the one I meant to say is not exposed, but it's a great field. In BC, it provides it. Some systems don't. But in this example, lot size is simply if I have my runtime. If you notice, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 or 5. They all want 1 hour. But I'm saying on one operation, do 100 an hour. Next one 200, and then one 500. And 1,000 an hour. So I reflect that in my routing. It's pretty easy to look at when you're trying to say, what's our standard? Oh, we should do 100 an hour. And somebody could say, well, that's not right. We can get 125. And all you'd have to do is change that to 125 for the next job. And that information can be printed on a production order. It does the math for you based on your run size. So you can set it up here and it just carries forward. So lot size is a key field that I'd encourage you to use if you aren't. It gets away from what I would call the decimal point, where my runtime is 0.12345. And you have to figure out, well, how many an hour can I do? You do the math to figure that out. Versus in 1 hour, I can do 1,250. And I have seen customers do this process takes 2.5 hours. That's my runtime, and I can do 17 in 2.5 hours. It might be a deburn or a different process. And at one customer, even an 8-hour shift, They just put in how many they're supposed to be able to do in an 8-hour shift. So they put the runtime was 8 hours, and they put the lot size was 730. Lots of flexibility with that, how to think to use that. Big fan of lot size. And then the routing comments, of course, these are key. You can have header comments, which affect the entire routing, or you can have line comments, which are specific to the operation. If this supports what you're doing, it can be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Some companies will have runtime documents that are stored attached to, now you can use Zeta Docs and attach those to finished items. And then when the production order paperwork prints, they might print the production order and the traveler, and then they might print a setup instructions along with it. Lots of different approaches on that, but routing comments obviously are needed if you don't have setup sheets on the floor, for instance.
All right, so John went through some of the basics of the routing setup, optional extra fields that you can use on the routings that might help you. And then let's just look at a few of the functions available that will help us in the maintenance and also analysis of the routings. So we'll go ahead and look at versions and alternate routings. Maybe, I know we're running out a little bit of time here, but maybe John, could you give an example or maybe why they might use versions on routings?
Yeah, you might have an example. I see I'm going to say I see alternate routings used much more than versions. Meaning, I have one customer, they have a routing for running it in a 500 gallon size, 800 gallon size, 1,000 gallon size. They have 3 different routings, and when the planner creates the production order, they grab the routing that applies. Those I would call alternate routings. Versions would be if the routing has been changed and you need to save the initial routing, and it could be that based on the product, it goes through a different route step. An older version might go through a different process than a newer version. But again, like I said, I haven't not seen versions used on routings.
Okay. There's also a copy routings function, so you can easily copy operation steps from one routing to another and then modify them. So it just simplifies creating future routings if you need to. On a routing, there's a where used feature. So that's on the header. If you go under the routing button and go to where used, and this will show you all the finished good items that use this routing. I know John mentioned it earlier, but you don't have to set up one routing for each finished good item. Finished good items can share the same routing. All right, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm going to take you over to Business Central. And let's just look at a couple of those features that we saw in the PowerPoint slide. So the first one is the calculating of calendars. It's always easier to show that right in the software itself. So if I go to Work Centers, all right, and I'm on my Work Center list, I can go to Process, and the Work Center list is a real nice shortcut to calculating the Work Center calendars. So if you bring that up, you're going to put your starting and ending date, and you can click OK, and it will go through and calculate the calendars for all work centers. If you only want to calculate for a specific work center, you can, of course, put a filter in here. Now, you really want to remember to do this as part of your year-end processes, even maybe prior to year-end. So that way, if you're planning into the next year, you're not going to run into errors during your planning worksheet processes because the capacity has not been set up for your work centers or machine centers. So something to just keep in mind prior to your year end to make sure you're calculating the following year.
And I would even say that you should have 2021 out there already. And then at year end, you're doing 2022 just to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, that's a good best practice. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, machine centers, I don't know why they make it a little more complicated to find, but if we go to the machine center list, there's no shortcut. So we'd have to go to the calendar, and then it asks how you want to view the calendar by day. I'm going to show matrix. And then from here, actions, functions, calculate, or there's a recalculate. So if you've already calculated it for the year, but you made some changes to your shop calendar, or you made changes to concurrent capacities or anything like that, then you can do a recalculate. All right, then of course on the routings, there was a couple functions to look at. So let's pull up a routing. First, we have the copy routing function. So I've created a new finished good product. We got sick of working with bikes in the Kronos company, so we created a candy company that we work with in manufacturing. So we're going to create peanut butter M&Ms. So if I go into that routing, you'll see I have no routing steps. But at the top, I can go to functions, copy routing, and copy in my lines from one of my other routings. So I'm going to take my base M&M routing, copy that in. And then here I can make any changes that I want. You know, maybe this run time's 2 hours. Maybe I delete a work center line, add another, but I have a base to start with from here. And then from here, once it's copied in and updated, I can certify it to begin using it. So copy routing, super easy to use. And then finally, we have the versions that we were talking about earlier. So how do versions work? A couple of the setups on your routings, you can have version numbers, so have a number series. The routing card will always show what your active version is as well, and that's based on today's date. So if I go to routing versions, okay, I have one version out there already, but I'm going to create a second version. I'm not using version numbers. I like to use the routing number dash a version number. So I manually enter in my code. All right, and I can enter a starting date. So maybe as of May 1st, this is the new routing that we'll be using. And under actions, I'm just going to copy from my base routing and then modify it from here. Okay, so it pulls in my base routing. Maybe I know on this work center line, the mixer, I'm going to know a specific machine. I'm going to use the 102 machine center instead of the work center. Just an example. Okay, so I can update my routing. That's what I'm going to do as of May 1st, and I'm going to certify it. If I go back to my routing list, or my routing card, I'm sorry. Was going to show the version matrix, but it is not here.
Just to add to that, what Jenny's showing you is, unlike the bill of material where it has a end date, start date, I can actually go to the bill and say, oh, on May 1st, we're switching this item. Routings don't have that. All they have is a version. So if you truly are, as of May 1st, running it differently, you create a version and its effective date. And that's what's used on every production order.
I don't know what happened to the button on my BC here, but there is a version matrix that will show you a matrix of your routing for each version and what the changes were per version code as well. That's kind of a nice feature. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint to wrap things up. Finally, we thought, is there any useful reports just on routings? We're going to go through loads and things like that in a future webinar. So we'll show you reports on how you can look at loads later on in another webinar. But the only real report out there that would just be about the routing itself is the routing sheet. So if you want to view basic information of the routing in a report format and to be able to put in a production quantity, this is the report that you could use. So you can see here I entered a production quantity and it gives me all my operation steps. All right, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. Again, just basics on work centers, machine centers, routings, and in our future webinars, we're going to show you how production orders and transactions and everything really works and functions off of those base setups. So I will pass it back to Angie.
Thank you, Jenny and John. We do have one question that came through, and I apologize if this was already explained. How do you set up labor and machine cost for one work center, or reflects the unit cost for both?
I'll jump on that one. That's a use of parallel routing. So one, and again, one operation is the machine, and that's where your overhead is on, and that might be auto-consumed. And then the second parallel operation is how many people. So if you need to get to that level, that's how you would approach that. You have parallel operations, one representing the machine that you're scheduling and running. That's the constraint, that's what you're managing. And the second one would be people. How many people? Like I could have a machine run for 1 hour and I could have a person I need for half an hour. I could set that up in my routing. So when I got overhead for the machine and I've got half hour of direct labor, or I've got 3 people, I've got a capacity of 3 for the people. So for every hour of runtime of the machine and overhead, I have 3 costs times my labor pool of people. So that's how you would do that. You need to separate it out because you can't have one work center, and I've seen companies do this, where the cost for that work center, well, we got to build in, let's see, we got 2.5 people, so I'm going to make that $47.50 an hour. That's, they try and build in. A better approach to that is to have an operation for the machine, how much time you need to run it, and then you have a parallel operation where I need 2.5 people. That gives you 2 views. One is the machine load, and one is where do I need people. You start seeing out of that labor pool, let's say I have 25 people, I'm starting to ramp that up to see how many man hours I have next week, or tomorrow, the next week, the week after. It starts helping you with that too.
Okay, thank you, John. And then do I need to bring the standard task code forward?
Standard task codes are, you can add them to the routing. When you build the routing, you have to add that field to the view, and that'll just copy into the next production order. It's a user-defined table. You add your task codes as you need them. You can set them up. If you add it to the routing, when you build your production order, it'll just pull it forward from the routing table.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question is, when version date is reached, is everything automatically switched over when that date occurs?
Yes, that's the purpose of that. It's effective May 1st. So if I create a production order or I run planning on May 1st, it's going to pull in that active routing. Because as I mentioned, we don't have, like on the bill of material, there isn't a start and end date. We don't have that on the routings. We don't say this operation is expiring on April 31st and then this one is effective. It's a version. if you have something like that you need.
Okay. Thank you both, John and Jenny, and for everyone who has attended on today's webinar, we thank you. And if you're watching on demand, thank you for joining us. You had some very good questions, and we did go over a little bit of time, but I appreciate you all staying on with us.
Okay. So if you want to learn more or you have more questions, you can contact our resident manufacturing expert here, John Grant. His information on the slide.
They're trapped at home, so they have to do something.
Yeah, they have time, right? Okay.
They have time, right? You're trapped at home.
And then finally, I know I put some plugs throughout our whole webinar, but here's a list of our upcoming webinars in our series. So our next one will be April 15th, where we're going to build on our BOM and route webinars and now talk about production orders and how they're created and processed. So each webinar will kind of build on the next, and we'll get a little more complicated as we continue through our series.
And to add to that, we do have all of our webinars in our webinar library on our website, and you can find that at innovia.com/past events. And so you can see all of those webinars from John and Jenny's webinar series and any of our previous ones. So if you need to refer back to those. And I just want to let you know that we do have a few more webinars coming soon. Tomorrow we have Tracy Bergetsker from Innovia Consulting, and she's going to be presenting on Protect Your Business with Positive Pay in Microsoft Dynamics. And then next week, Tuesday, we have Gino Pack from Innovia Consulting, and he's going to be presenting on using Power Automate to supercharge Business Central. So if you're interested in any of our upcoming webinars, I encourage you to visit our website, and that's innovia.com/events. And Innovia has a podcast going on. If you have not heard of it already, it's called the Innovia Conversation. We just want to encourage you to listen to our selection that Steve Waltz and Jeff Progulski have provided to us over the last year. And they do about 2 episodes per month, and you can find out about all the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. So check out the selection and subscribe so you'll be notified when those new episodes air. All right, well, we thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on another Innovia webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.